What is going on, everyone? Welcome on into Open Ice Hits. This drama during the trade deadline is amazing. And I'll be honest with you, I knew that there were going to be some pushes made, and I figured squads were going to go out there and try and improve their team because, you can argue that, well, there's a flat cap and you don't want to give up too much in COVID-19 and this and that. At the end of the day, if you're pursuing for that Stanley Cup and you think you're close, you're going to try and make that added little veteran help or that added piece because, hey, you're in that win now type of mode. But what I saw the market was going for and some of these guys, first-round picks, second-round picks galore, I was a little stunned with where the market was at. Not so much teams trying to add that bonus to help them out. So, yeah, crazy. Durso, how do you feel about what went down, just overall big picture here as you saw squads attack that that trade deadline market?
Probably more than I expected. It wasn't going to be the biggest trade deadline out there probably, and I think that we started to see that. I mean, the fact that we were talking about a trade on the last show and we were talking about the Islanders making their bid to go for it, basically if any team had a go for it move, they pretty much had one in mind, and that was where everything stopped. So it wasn't much of a surprise to see limited activity. I believe I saw the NHL sent an email out with all of the trades from the day specifically. Now that doesn't include a handful that were made on Sunday night into Monday that didn't apply to the deadline day, so to speak. But the number of trades and the number of players moved was significantly lower on deadline day than in previous years, which is to be understood. It was a flat cap. All the stuff with COVID and the way the schedule is structured and the way that the league is structured maybe made some GMs pause a little bit. And that's understandable, but it was still probably busier than I thought, even though, we were texting back and forth about it last night, and I had seen on ESPN.com there was a quote from one NHL GM that said, just wait until the draft, because that's really when it's going to pick up. And we're setting the stage for some exciting stuff, because there's going to be, I think there's a lot of teams out there that now have to start evaluating their futures, and it's going to be exciting when we get to draft time. And it's not supposedly going to be the greatest draft class in the world, so wheeling and dealing could be a big thing.
Well, I think that's maybe one of the reasons why you did see all the moves being made. And plus with the expansion draft, that's a whole nother element that's so random and not normal. When you're a GM, you have to think about that. If you make a move, a lot of the UFAs were in play, which is a huge factor in this as well. I guess I was more a little shocked with not so much how many moves, but maybe more so the first round picks getting thrown around. And you kind of alluded to it. If this draft class, if everyone's kind of looking at it as, what are we going to get this year? How much talent's really out there? Where, well, if you want to throw a first out there for Savard, or if you want to throw, although Buffalo's the one, how ironic, that seemed to maybe get the short end of the stick. So why don't we start there? Taylor Hall gets traded from Buffalo. We figured it was going to happen at some point. That team is a disaster. Taylor Hall is such an interesting piece. We saw him have an MVP season, make the Devils go on this nice ride, right, and all that. But he's got 19 points right now. He has 2 goals. And we actually discussed the Bruins last episode. They need more depth scoring. I actually like the attempt by Boston with the UFA. I wonder how much the $8 million scared some other teams away, just in terms of trying to get that to fit, even though Buffalo did take on half of that salary. I just wonder from the Bruins' perspective with all this. Like, I get it's a shot in the dark, but I think the name is flashier than maybe the production that you're thinking you're going to get. Like, who's to say that this doesn't work? Not that it's not a bad shot in the dark, but I just feel like you think, wow, Taylor Hall, my man's got 2 goals. Two. This guy is too good, even if you're on a bad team. So we think. And I'm saying so we think in terms of too good, not so much the Sabres not being a bad team. He should have more than 2 goals.
Yeah, so this is a great place to start, because Saturday evening following the Flyers-Bruins game, I was actually hanging out with a buddy of mine who went to the game.
I thought you were going to say Taylor Hall.
No, I was hanging out with a buddy of mine who went to the game as a Boston fan, and I actually was chatting with him a little bit last night after, because I went, well, so they're going for it, huh? Obviously. I mean, that's a pretty significant move, obviously, to make. One of the things I noticed right away about this is, Taylor Hall basically controlled this trade in a big way, because the no move clause that's in his deal allowed him to basically tell Buffalo, I'll play for Boston and no one else, in a way. He got to kind of control where he went. So that's why the price back was probably the way it was. Retaining the salary, a second-round pick, a player in Anders Bjork who is kind of almost an equal in a sense to Curtis Lazar. And I think Lazar's the better player, probably a little bit of the either higher ceiling or already reached that higher point of performance than Bjork has, because Bjork just hasn't been able to really crack that lineup like Lazar is. And that's fine. I mean, I think people are going to actually really like Lazar in that deal. I think Lazar's going to be a good fit in Boston, quite honestly. But beyond that, one of the good points that you can make is, first of all, now Taylor Hall is going to play with a power play like that. And obviously, Buffalo's power play at one point in time early in the year was ranked first in the league because Jack Eichel was that good. And Jack Eichel stops playing because he's hurt, and Buffalo's power play goes from first to 12th in a few weeks.
Still better than the Flyers.
Yeah, I hear you, but that's beside the point. Where I'm getting at is that, so now give him David Pastrnak and give him Patrice Bergeron and give him Brad Marchand and probably make him, I don't know if he'd be the net front guy, but do something with him where he's in a spot to be just as productive. And, I don't know where you're going to get, probably Marchand would maybe go to the front of the net and you put Hall on the right side there at the right circle. Pasternak's the left circle. Bergeron's kind of the middle guy. And then you have, I guess McAvoy was the one running. McAvoy or Grzelcyk was the one running it out of the back when healthy. That's obviously one of the biggest holes that Boston still has at this point, is just trying to get healthy on the blue line. It means I think just about every one of their defensemen has gone down in the last few weeks. I mean, McAvoy's not playing. Grzelcyk left Saturday's game and isn't playing right now. Carlo's out. Like, they're missing a lot of key pieces on the blue line. And if they can get them healthy, and now that you've added Hall, Lazar's a nice piece that can play both ways. I think then you've got something cooking here a little bit. I think that they've at least tried to solidify their place as at least the number 4 in the division to make the playoffs. Because once you get in, it really is all up in the air. Anything could happen if you're in the playoffs, even if they have to play a 1-4 matchup in there going against Washington or the Islanders or even Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh's up there too. So
yeah, it definitely
all
helped.
those teams are in.
I'm not saying it doesn't help them, but here's what I have realized over Taylor Hall's last stretch here. I mean, look, we talk about this all the time, specifically the NBA, and I know that's different than hockey, but when you see a guy and it's like, well, he averages 20 points per game. Yeah, but he was on Indiana, Oklahoma City, Houston, and, another team. He was on a stretch of 4 teams in 5 seasons. Hey, there's something to that. Why is that? When you look at Taylor Hall, in the beginning, yeah, he was with Edmonton. But when he goes from New Jersey to Arizona to Buffalo to Boston, you're talking about within a handful of years, this man is getting shipped all around. And I wonder why that is. We know that there's skill there. We watched him have 94 points. We watched him tear up teams, and we know that he is an unbelievable talent. But when you are that crazily good, why is it that you are getting bounced around? There has to be some sort of common denominator on why things are maybe not working out in one city when you have that type of unreal skill set, don't you think?
Yeah, that's a fair point. And not only that, but, think about what I just said also about where's the one area that I went to. Oh, yeah, he'll help their power play probably because he fits in, and look at all the guys he get to play with. But we talked about it on the last show. Their depth scoring has to be there, too. It can't just be the same 3 guys over and over again. And they've tried to split that group up. And I did think that in watching them over the weekend, Craig Smith's on a little bit of a roll right now, and that helps. And granted, look who he's playing with. But you got to get that middle group going a little bit. And listen, again, I was talking to a buddy of mine who is a Boston fan and turned around and said they'd move on from Jake DeBrusk if they really, it wouldn't hurt them. Probably, and that's weird to say because he was a first-round pick and he was a guy who they latched a lot onto. And so maybe the thought process here also is if you put Taylor Hall on the second line with David Krejci and maybe DeBrusk is part of that group or somebody else doesn't really, or, maybe it's Nick Ritchie, you take your pick. Bottom line is if it gets them going in some way and now you have 2 lines that produce at a good rate, then he's helping. But if it's not and it's still the same story, then what is he bringing to the team outside of being another guy on the power play potentially? That's the question. And then you do really start to wonder, especially if he's still a question mark to even re-sign there. He's going to be a free agent. Are we going to see another team outside, like you said, New Jersey, Arizona, Buffalo, now Boston? Is there a 5th team out there within the next year?
Yeah, probably. This is going to be big for him.
and it was weird because he kind of almost like essentially you're sitting there wondering what was the point of the Buffalo deal at that point in time. Why did you sign there if ultimately later on you were going to hold their hand and tell them this is where I'm going to go? So what was the point of signing there other than that maybe they were the one team that offered you $8 million for a year? Like, is that what it was?
Sure.
And it's funny because there was a whole thing made about his familiarity with Ralph Kruger at the time. The performance of that team got Ralph Kruger fired this year.
Yeah.
So you went there thinking there's a familiarity. You wanted to, and it was funny to watch him also say, and the full context of his quote was better than what was out there a lot on social media. But the point being, he talked about he wanted to be one of the guys, not the guy. You're still a name, and you've been a name your entire career, whether it's been in Edmonton pre-Connor McDavid days, because he was there long before McDavid was, in New Jersey as the number one guy. When he got traded to Arizona, he was still one of the top guys out there. And on Buffalo, it's you and Jack Eichel. And maybe, yes, you're sitting there going, Jack Eichel's a better player than Taylor Hall is. That's fine. But when Jack Eichel goes down, now you're the guy again. So you're only second in line. It's not like you can blend in with the rest of that group like he can in Boston probably. That's I think what the point is he's trying to make by going to Boston is he's now way behind Bergeron, Marchand, Pastrnak, and there's three guys that are above him on that list.
I wonder how much this impacts the future of where he's going, though. I mean, if he has an unreal backstretch and he scores X amount of goals and he looks like the Taylor Hall that we saw in New Jersey that year that he was, that guy, will he get that deal again? Like imagine if he does, I don't know, 4 goals remaining with Boston and he gives you kind of the same pace or something along the lines of the same pace that he gave you in Buffalo. What type of contract is he going to get in the offseason? How much support is he going to get from some of these teams that are looking to sign a guy? There's no way that I could see him touching $8 million again. Or is it his name is so big, his ceiling is so high that it doesn't matter what he does, people will take a shot on him because you always say, well, if he plays the best of his ability, he can be a 90-point type of production guy, so he'll get that ticket anyway. But it'll be interesting to see if he kind of gives you and he's underwhelming and he's not really flashy. How does that impact what type of contract that he'll get in the offseason after this run with Boston? I mean, he's a huge name who has the ceiling of dominance.
He's a huge name, but he's running out of time too because you can only bounce around to so many destinations and not make it work. And look, He's played for some teams that at the time he's played for them have not been in a position to do much with his abilities, right? Like he might be – this kind of goes back to his thing about being the guy, right? Because he was in Edmonton before Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. So you're not getting that kind of, talent on your roster with him at that time. And once it was, you almost wonder if he had tuned out a lot of stuff going on there because of the years of still being at the bottom of the standings, getting first overall picks, that kind of stuff. Then he goes to New Jersey. Well, New Jersey hasn't really been going anywhere for the last few years. Maybe they're trying to keep taking steps in that direction, but ultimately, look what they did at the deadline.
The difference is, though, he produced. I'm just looking at his points. Like that year in Edmonton, 22 goals, 27 goals, 27 goals, 26 goals. It was at least getting on the board. So whether the team had success or not, he was having, I'm not going to tell you he was blowing just blowing everybody out of the water, but he was still giving you something that was respectable in terms of Taylor Hall numbers. Now, I mean, I don't even know if I'm talking about team success, but just personal success has just dipped off. And I mean, if you can do it early in your career with an Edmonton team where, you're still young and raw and trying to figure out, you would think when you're more of a veteran with more IQ, even though teams focus on you more and they put out their number one defenseman and they definitely dissect you more, you should have more knowledge of being able to kind of counter that at the same point.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, to me, it's beyond the New Jersey years where you're saying he still produced. He goes to Arizona. Arizona does get into the playoffs because of the strange situation that the whole season was in a year ago, right? Like when everything paused, he's going to make the playoffs. They win a series that probably not many people gave him a shot to win. And then in the offseason, he has the potential to go to a team where he can take that next step, where he can play for a team with talent. He's one of the top free agents on the market at that point in time. And he ends up on a 1-year deal in Buffalo. And everybody's kind of going, okay, you think there's potential in Buffalo? Okay, like, prove us wrong, but you're one guy, and your talent better be off the charts. Like,
Well,
it better be the MVP year.
we expected it to be better than what it was.
Oh yeah, but I'm saying, like, he really had to back that up when he went to a place like that.
True.
And ultimately, now he's trying to figure out a way to almost salvage this year by going to a team that is going to make the playoffs, most likely, that is going to at least be in the conversation, that always is in the conversation. Like, let's be realistic about that too. Boston's always a team over the last how many years? Probably at least the last 15 years that's always in this conversation in one way or another. And there are years where they don't look like they're going to be a cup favorite, and they end up making a bit of a run anyway. And there are years where they really look like a cup favorite, and they do anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that I can look at Boston right now and say, oh, they're right there. They're going to possibly go to the cup right now. They're going to need a run because they're probably going to be the fourth team out of four in that East Division right now. And they're going to have to beat two teams better than them from the regular season just to get to the Final Four of this whole thing. But I don't, this is, I think, an opportunity for him to show that he can contribute in that more of a depth role while still being a name because, quite frankly, you may never get another chance like this where you're on a roster with that much talent.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm really fascinated to see that. You brought up Curtis Lazar, and maybe it's wrong for me, but I always tie him to where he was drafted, first round. Yeah, he's just so underwhelming. I think I've been holding on but if Curtis Lazar gets moved and plays here, or if Curtis Lazar goes there, maybe this is a new fresh start for him. I think he kind of is what he is, and I don't know. I feel like I'm out on Curtis Lazar. I've given him too many opportunities to prove me that he's not this slump of a player that he is, but he kind of has solidified what he is as what his production has been to this point. So I don't think there's any breakout involved in Curtis Lazar. But let's look at the Sabres' perspective here, just with getting that second-round pick. I'm pretty sure Montour went for a third. When you start moving some of these other pieces and you see what else is being moved around this league, to see that a second-round pick is what you got in return, don't you think that that's extremely underwhelming? Leave it to the Buffalo Sabres to get that second-round pick when these firsts are flying around. You got potential. Hey, could Scott Lawton give you a first? And Savard, the Tampa Bay Lightning's getting moved for this. And I just mentioned, you move Montour for a third, you would think that Taylor Hall would be able to get you more than a second. And the thing with the money is, because it's a UFA, it would be different if there were years on this contract at $8 million, but whoever's making that push for Taylor Hall knows the money's in play. So, I mean, that's not stopping you from getting more of a pick. There's just no way, especially when you're taking on money.
Man, you mentioned the Montour trade. That happened Saturday. It felt like it was 2 weeks ago with the way that everything happens on deadline day.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I think Hall had a lot of leverage in that because of the fact that he was going to pick the destination to an extent. He had to waive the no move clause to be able to go to Boston. So that gives you leverage in that respect. Like the player has leverage that if they really knew they had, let's put it this way. What that says to me is that Taylor Hall was not going to be a Buffalo Sabre next season. And I think they knew that. And if they knew that, then they had to do what they had to do. And you got to get something back for him. I don't know how Lazar factors into it. Lazar, I think, is just another piece that they can move out because I think that they know you get to a certain point where you got to make some changes one way or another, whether it's bringing guys up, drafting new guys, because let's just say they'll be in a position to potentially get a high-end pick here. I mean, they should get the first overall pick, but we know that's not the way that it always works, but they should be. And again, you're going to see this, this team have to try to put the pieces together somehow. So from Buffalo's perspective, it's kind of going back on this again and trying to figure out the best. I mean, granted, the one thing they have to, the area they have to make a big decision on is Eichel, honestly. You got to figure out whether or not he's still your cornerstone piece that you build around or whether you really are trying to start over.
Oh, no, that's so bad. Imagine doing what they did.
But tell me that's not true, though. I mean,
no, it is.
Guy left.
That's what's sad. I think the right thing at this point is to start insanely fresh. But the problem is you started insanely fresh to get your Jack Eichel. You finally hit on a stud, legit player, and now you got to kind of redo it all over again. I agree with you. It's probably the best move for your franchise, but it's a It's a fat gut punch. It really is. I mean, you should be sick to yourself if you're a Sabres fan.
Especially one offseason after you basically sat there and said that was the point of the Taylor Hall deal, was to give him a guy that basically was supposed to restore his confidence in being a team that was going to try to take the steps to be better than what they had been. I mean, and realistically, beyond Eichel, I mean, who else do they even have? I mean, they kept Linus Ullmark, which is pretty telling, honestly, because they could have gotten something for him.
Dahlin, I mean, he's just a young player, but he's not flashy enough.
Dahlin doesn't do enough to show off, what for where he was drafted. And
correct.
You got, they're not getting rid of Jeff Skinner because they can't. I mean, they've tried. They can't. And then, look, I do think that there would have been a team out there that would have taken a flyer on Sam Reinhart. I think there would have. Playoff teams like players like that. But they don't see – his name never even came up, quite frankly. So it's like – and maybe Ristolainen, because Ristolainen was a name that was floated out there. Teams would look at a guy like that, and I guess so. I mean, I don't think Ristolainen, realistically, for a team that would go out and get him, would need anything more than a third-pairing defenseman from him. But that's fair to say when you're trying to pick up guys that complement your team and round it out, not build your whole franchise around it. So you're basically left with Eichel as the leader of this whole thing. That's the one piece that you got. I almost said, no, I shouldn't say the one piece you got, because Dahlin was the first overall pick, obviously. But that's one of the few that you got at the top of the draft that was supposed to be the build around type of piece. And we're not seeing, we're not seeing it, obviously. It's a really, I certainly can tell you that for all the stuff that I watch when I go to Flyers games and I cover the team, and there's, a lot of things that can be said about that, I don't envy what people have to do when they talk about Buffalo, because it's kind of it kind of almost magnifies that situation. At least the Flyers have multiple players that I sit there and say you can build around. Buffalo has basically one, maybe two.
Yeah, no, the Flyers are
trying to figure out where you're at.
Yeah, the Flyers are in a tough spot for sure, but it doesn't even – when you talk about Sabres territory, I mean, that is dysfunction on a whole nother level of, I don't even know where to begin in terms of like dissecting where they go from here, kind of, even though we think the Flyers are in a tough spot. But let's go to Toronto, because that's the next step here. They made some moves. I like what they did. I really did. I like what they did all around the board. They went out and went netminder, right? They go out and get Riddick. They went out and got Foligno. I love that move. I think he brings in veteran experience. And guess what? He's going right back to Columbus at the end of the season. So he's like, hey, get this first pick, get this pick in the next, you know what I mean? Utilize these picks. I'll be right back. Just keep my stall right where it needs to be. I'll be there and be the captain. Here's a subtle move that I don't even think is getting talked about a lot, and I think this guy is such a great role piece, and they got him for a conditional 7th that could be a 6 if he plays about 25% or whatever the case may be, one of those conditions. Riley Nash. Like, I think that guy just fourth line center, you're going to get good role guy. I think they added some really solid pieces with that, and they also went with San Jose was in that trade for taking on salary and a 4th-round pick as well. But ultimately, you look at the Maple Leafs, they picked up some awesome forwards. They picked up a netminder to help them out, even though it seems like, hey, 10 games in a row, it doesn't matter who's in the net. They can get, well, it does matter. It's one man giving you that 10-game win streak there in between the pipes. But just all around, I think this is a strong, strong move from the Maple Leafs.
So I'm trying to address this in a couple different layers here. So one of the things is, I believe we talked about it on the last show, the unique landscape of the playoffs this year is going to make the teams that are there right now say this might be the best shot. And if you're Toronto sitting, even with the way that the game on Monday night went for them, if you're sitting there at 59 points in the standings, ranked 2nd overall in the entire league, top team in the East right now, or in the so-called Eastern Conference, if you will, top team in the North for sure, but like the traditional Eastern Conference, this might be the best shot. And you know what you're going to get in the first part of the playoffs. You're going to get the same teams that you've been playing all year long. And, obviously, I think you look at the way Montreal played them in that Monday night game, you go, playing in series against those teams that you've been playing all year long to start the playoffs for the first 2 rounds is going to be a challenge. You need to get reinforcements wherever you can. And I almost wonder, I kind of start with Riddick on this because, nothing against what Jack Campbell's doing right now. He's had a lot of success. But this is going to be his first time trying to be the guy in, like, if he were to be the guy in the playoffs. And obviously Freddie Anderson's part of this too. But you go, do they want a guy like Riddick who has played in a playoff series before and who has that valuable experience that you may need to have instead of Jack Campbell? You know what I mean? And that's, again, it's not a knock on Campbell, but even we don't know how the playoff structure is going to look. Last year we're sitting there over the summer watching teams play back-to-backs in key playoff series, right?
Yeah.
If that's the case, are you going to go to Campbell twice in a row, or are you going to go to another guy twice in a row?
That's a great point.
You might want another guy. And I had a weird feeling that goaltending was going to be incredibly valuable. It's why, for all the questions that I get and see, and I get asked it when I do spots on the radio and things like that about, Carter Hart and should he go to the minors? And you go, no, because if you'd have to put him on waivers to get him to the minors, and anybody out there, are you kidding? He makes less than $1 million. Anybody would be crazy not to go after
real quick
another goalie.
I did feel like I heard, maybe it was Jason Martinez or something, about Carter Hart, where I don't think he would have had to go through waivers.
No, he's not waiver exempt though.
Okay, I don't know the technicality of it, so I did hear someone mention that, and I'm pretty sure I heard them say, "Well, he technically doesn't have to." So, but I agree with you. You don't go to the minors anyway. Just in general, even if he doesn't have to clear waivers. I was going to go more along the lines of, would you rather if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, would you rather go through Riddick, or would you rather go through maybe a trade for Brian Elliott? Which one do you think gives you a better opportunity? I like Moose, man. It's tough for him to be the everyday guy, but same with Riddick, to be fair, no?
Well, one key point that was brought up, and I think it's an excellent point, is that Riddick doesn't have to go through a quarantine. It's a Canadian trade. So they get him, and he's ready to play as soon as they need him, and that's a pretty big step, instead of trying to get a guy who you're going to have to wait to use for at least 7 days, maybe a little longer, especially if it's a goaltender who you need to get kind of into the practice setting and get him warmed up again and things like that, because it's hard, especially for a goalie. It's going to be really hard to say you have to take a week off. You can't even go to the facility, and then you have to be ready to go. I think they wanted a guy who they could throw out there right away if they wanted to, and that's probably why they opted for that. I don't know that Elliott was even on the market anyway, but I get your point. Like, let's put it this way. Pick a name that did get traded that was on the market. They didn't go out there and say, let's go get Devin Dubnyk, because same thing. Devin Dubnyk goes from San Jose to Colorado, and they can use him whenever they want to right away, pretty much. I mean, once he arrives and gets settled in, obviously. Same thing with this. Riddick gets to go from Calgary to Toronto and can play pretty much right away because he's already part of that culture, so to speak, in that area where there is no quarantine involved. You're allowed to just jump right in. So I think that's a big one. And so now I want to shift over to the other guys, like you mentioned, because obviously they bolstered the depth a little bit. I know that in talking about the Flyers situation, I thought Scott Lawton was a fit for Toronto if they went out there. And kind of basically my thoughts on that kind of were dashed when Foligno was traded, because that's exactly the same type of player to an extent. I mean, I'm not trying to sit there and say they're the exact same player, but that's the exact same role that you're looking to fill. Here's a guy who can give you some of that energy. I don't think Foligno is, obviously Foligno is older and he's not going to be as fast or as flashy, maybe. I mean, he's shown moments of that, don't get me wrong. I remember him scoring a pretty flashy goal against the Flyers in recent memory. But I think they like that idea of having a guy who has been through some challenges in his career, not just from where he's played or having to play through a playoff run and having to go through what playoff hockey is all about, but also a guy who had to, play around a coach like John Tortorella, who has to hear John Tortorella, when he talked about Foligno, and it kind of goes to what you were saying about how, that probably is just going to be a reunion come the offseason, because Tortorella said the relationship will continue. We'll see him again. And very, sort of indiscreetly kind of made it seem like, oh, this is only going to be temporary. He'll be back. Don't worry about it. And we're not naming a captain in between. Because,
you read between the lines here, right?
Kind of. But at the same time, to Tortorella say, when I met him, I didn't know much about him. And I honestly, at one point, had to ask, not ask, but I wondered, is he even leadership quality material? And he's grown so much. And
that's such a Tortorella thing to say. He would say that about Patrice Bergeron because he's John Tortorella.
Now, but it's funny you say that, though, because as much as that's probably true, is Nick Foligno better for that? Probably. He probably took that the way he had to. You got to remember something. Under his leadership as a captain, under Tortorella being the type of coach he is, and pushing that team the way that he does, They won a playoff series against a team that won 62 games in a regular season and was pretty much the odds-on favorite to win the Stanley Cup that year, and they swept them. Like, that takes some sort of quality that, you can be the backbone of the team. Well, even if you're not the guy who goes out and scores all the goals and things like that. I mean, they had plenty of offensive talent and were a good defensive team without Foligno per se as the main guy. But they do get that leadership from him. They do get that quality that just kind of that belief in the room almost.
I think
you need a guy like
toughness.
that.
Toughness is a good word, too, for him because he does play with that extra bang. He gives you that, they were looking for, because they have the young, fast, skill guys. They were always looking for that toughness, and they go out and get a Wayne Simmons, and like that kind of added that layer. And then you try and get in a guy like Foligno. I just think it's perfect. He's not going to be a goal scorer. He's not going to be this guy. He's like, when you look through his stats, what he normally is he'll give you 30 points. So he'll give you that pace of 30 points. But there's one thing that we talk about is veteran leadership. We talk about him from a, culture, locker room standpoint. I think that's such a key piece to what he brings. But there is this element of, like when you bring in these guys that you look at as, quote, a veteran, a lot of them do have some playoff experiences. And while you're right, it was big to have that upset. That's the only success of playoff success the Columbus Blue Jackets have had. So is he as battle-tested in the playoffs? Is he as veteran-savvy as most veterans that are picked up at the deadline, if that makes sense? I don't want to downplay his voice because I think if you wear a C in a locker room, in an NHL locker room, you have all the respect in the world. Everyone's going to look at you a certain way if you're coming in a trade and you had that C on your chest. But I do wonder, when you look for those players to help you out in playoff key stretches, like there really isn't that much playoff success to look back on his career and be like, he's been tested. He knows how to get it done. They had an awesome, awesome, awesome playoff series. But am I downplaying that?
Maybe a little, and I'll tell you why, because I do think he's mentally tough from the coaching that he's had to take over the years because of who he played for. But also you got to go back, like I just looked it up because I wanted to see where he was from because I had a feeling he had a somewhat sort of a Toronto connection or kind of a idea of how important the market is in Toronto.
Columbus, Ohio?
No, he was born in Buffalo, New York, but obviously his dad played, Mike Foligno, and Mike Foligno was from Ontario, from Sudbury, Ontario. So there you go, right? Like there's got to be, I think there's an understanding of what that Toronto market means to the league, to the game, what the Maple Leafs mean to the city of Toronto, and how important it is for that team to have success at some point down the road here to break this long drought that they're in as well. And I think that that's why this is a fit for him, because he's mentally tough enough to handle the idea that this is a big year for them with where they are in the standings, with where they're probably going to be when the playoffs start. And to an extent, same thing with Riley Nash. I mean, now Riley Nash does not have the same kind of, leadership quality, and that's not a knock, by the way. Like, he's just not the guy who gets talked about in the same breath as Nick Foligno and guys who are captaincy roles and things like that. But he does have to play a role, and I think that he is another guy who is one of those grinding type of guys who's going to give you that kind of play. And I think that that's what might make a difference for Toronto, because so much for Toronto is the flash that they have. It's Austin Matthews. Look how flashy Austin Matthews is. Look how flashy Mitch Marner can be. John Tavares plays with a little bit of an edge to an extent because he's willing to go to the net in certain situations. But is he going to be the most overly physical guy? Probably not, because he knows the importance of being one of the scorers, not one of the physicality guys. Now you're getting some physicality guys. You're going to, and Simmons might have been the start of it in the offseason, but now you're getting some physicality guys. And it's going to make a difference in the playoffs when things ramp up to a new level. When, if the season started today, they'd be playing Montreal. Montreal plays with an edge. Everybody knows it. They've seen it for the last year. They play with an edge. You've got to be ready to take that on. And now I think you've got a few guys who are prepared to take that on.
Here's what I love about a guy like Riley Nash. By the way, just to put it in perspective, he's got 2 goals this season, the same as Taylor Hall. But you talk about the top flashy guys. If you have players like Riley Nash that you can feel comfortable putting out there, it's like you won't get scored on. You'll do the simple things. You'll chip the pucks out of the zone. You'll hit the red line, get it deep. You can even maybe actually possess the puck in the offensive zone a little bit and maybe get some scoring chances. But your job as a fourth liner is don't allow the other team to score on you. Give your top line some rest. A guy like Riley Nash, you know that he knows. You know that he's smart. You know that he knows the role. You can rely on him to go out there for 30, 35 seconds, be positionally sound, do the little things right, get Austin Matthews back out there. You can trust those style of fourth liners. And, like, you can't trust all these fourth-line guys out there in the league. You can't get scored on. You got to be able to rely on them for 30 seconds, do your job, and then get the top guys back out there. A player like Riley Nash, it's not something that pops off the trade market list and all, the trade deadline list. But I think that's so crucial to a team like the Maple Leafs where, four lines these days, it's just so important. And being able to have those guys out there, I think it can make the difference.
And not only that, but now you've got a lot of guys who, if they won, you feel really good about it, right? I mean, we were already talking about that with Joe Thornton to begin with. I know that people in the area that we are would love to see Wayne Simmons win it. I know that people would love to see Nick Foligno win it. Like there's guys now that you're sitting there going, if they won, there's a lot of feel-good stories. I mean, there'd be feel-good stories aside from those type of players, by the way, because all three of those guys kind of have that veteran, type of thing, like John Tavares. Wouldn't people feel great that he finally won? And
not the Islander fans.
Yeah, apparently not. But you know what I mean. Like, but he's
are there even Islander fans?
No, there are. I believe that. But he's been around for so long, right? Like, all those years with the Islanders, and now the irony is that the Islanders are in just as much of a position to go for it, and that's kind of, it's interesting to watch that dynamic now. To think that Toronto, the Islanders, teams like that, everybody, I think right now to an extent, and it doesn't always mean, like, it doesn't mean it's going to play out this way, but the way that the structure is, at least in this particular year, but it feels like everybody's trying to find a way to compete with Tampa and to say, how can we counter Tampa? And I think that now you've got the Islanders who've made their move. Toronto's made their move. Washington's trying to be all in a little bit. Tampa's definitely still trying to find that perfect piece. Like, they're not trying to find, they did. Like, they made a move that kind of said, we're trying to find that piece that bolsters our lineup for the rest of the year as well. All of that is really interesting to watch now. And even, like I said, even Boston, when they go out and get Taylor Hall, at least it does say go for it, right? Like, it's definitely not we're just trying to get through the rest of the regular season making the playoffs. No, that says that we're trying to make a significant move to be a player in the playoffs. And that's going to be really interesting when you watch all the other moves that were made by all the other teams. Now that Washington's made a move, the Islanders have made a move, Toronto's made a move. Like, I believe one of the few teams, I guess, that didn't really do much that's right there from that side of things is Carolina. And Carolina's right there too. I mean, Florida was making moves. Everybody, I think, is really honestly on that East Coast side kind of is trying to find the move that counters what Tampa Bay is doing and becomes a player in that discussion, because I think everybody kind of uses Tampa Bay as the benchmark now.
Sure, no doubt about it. So why don't we just kind of quickly go through a couple? You mentioned the Florida team. So, you go out and get Savard. You know what you're going to get out of him. The thing is, it's so hard because when you talk about Boston, their flaws were depth scoring. You get a Taylor Hall. It's very conversational, right? You talk about Toronto. They haven't won the cup. They're so cup thrived. Their thirst for the cup is there, and they're thriving, and they're trying to go out and grab it. When you talk about Tampa, I mean, they're just such a powerhouse. Yes, getting Savard, it's such a big move in terms of how it helps out their decor and whatnot, but they're such a powerhouse that adding Savard is like, all right, we know they're a powerhouse. Like, their flaws aren't as open and their flaws aren't as there where, yeah, they're just getting stronger. And it's just as simple as that. They're a strong-ass team getting stronger by adding that presence on the D-line and Savard, and it is what it is. Have at it. Come get us kind of thing. So, I don't even think it's really conversational. It's just, yeah, they bolstered it. They made it even harder to go through, but we knew before this move that they were going to be hard to go through, so good luck getting there kind of thing.
Yeah, I like their team a lot, and I think they've done the thing they've done a really good job of over the last year is getting guys who are, low risk, high reward guys. I think of Anthony Duclair in that vein. There was really, he was negotiating his own contract. When you get him on a decent deal, there's not a terribly high commitment level, because not a lot of people were out there signing long-term deals. You're getting a guy who I think wants to prove himself. And That's the low risk, high reward of it, is that you've got guys who want to prove themselves. They were not, by the traditional standard, they were not a playoff team a year ago. They made the playoffs on that condition of the expanded playoff picture. So it was almost like they could only go up from there anyway. If they had another year like that, then yeah, there's questions, because you got a Hall of Fame head coach in Joel Quenneville, and you've got a Vezina winning goaltender in Sergei Bobrovsky, and you've got all these other pieces, that you think should be better than that. Barkov's on the rise, Ekblad, things like that. You've got all those guys. So why is it not working out? But
I'm a little lost. I'm a little lost how you went to the Florida Panthers, because I mentioned Savard going to Tampa.
I thought you mentioned somebody else. Didn't you mention Florida? You said the Florida team. That's why you said it. You said the word Florida. And
I was going to get to Sam Bennett, but you're going off on Quenneville. I'm like, did I mention? I am going to go off on Sam. You can go Sam Bennett route. I'm not stopping you.
No,
Keep going.
I'm
like, wait, how do we get to Sam Bennett?
I also think we know. Well, because I also think we know. We know what Tampa is.
That's what I was saying. Exactly. That was my point too. It's like it's almost so hard to be conversational with it, because they're so deep, they're so strong. They added help, and okay, they just added even an added bonus to them. So there's really not much you can dive deep into it. My brain was just like, how do we get to Quenneville? But I'm cool with it. Let's go Sam Bennett. Let's go Sam Bennett. In fairness,
I'll make one more quick point about Tampa really quick. Where do you you kind of have to ask, is Savard the pure rental at this point? Because I feel like whoever was going to get him has the interest in keeping him, obviously. I don't see any reason why not. And he would be a huge prize for any team if he made it to free agency. But it's like, we asked this question last year. They did win the cup. They did make their run. But then it was, how do you keep the band together? Your cap space is a question mark. How do you keep the band together? And they kind of, in a weird sort of way, got lucky to an extent, unlucky and lucky at the same time, because you don't want to lose Nikita Kucherov, but it made it easier as the season approached to sit there and go, well, now we can go out and just sign all these guys again, because he's going on LTIR. That's pretty easy to work with. Now you got to. That's another thing I wonder too, is how close is he, and when does he come back, if he does? Because there was talk he could be ready for the playoffs. What if he's ready for the playoffs? How do you make that money work now that you've acquired a guy like Savard, who you knew was going to be making some decent money? And if I'm not mistaken, there was salary retained in that deal as well, I believe, by Columbus. But even so, how do you make that work? You just, but Savard is very much their.
You'd think they have that planned out, though, because I'm with you. How do you make? They strategically process that on how it would all flow down.
We also ask it every year. We asked it at the deadline a year ago. We asked it in the offseason. They've made it work every single time. Savard is, I was just about to say, Savard is their Shattenkirk from a year ago, by the way. Like, that's exactly what it is. Like, and maybe not exactly the same player, because I think Shattenkirk has more offensive production than Savard does, but that's still the same. It still falls in the same line. Like, if that's the area they felt like was a need to address, they've addressed it. In the same way that a year ago it was. And they re-signed, or they had these guys for another year on their contracts, which is why it was significant. But the same way they go out and they get Barclay Goodrow and Blake Coleman, and they say these guys are here for another year, and there's the bottom six rounded out. Grinder guys, can score a few goals, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Now the Sam Bennett stuff. By the way, they gave up a first and a third for Savard. So, but when you're that type of go now mode and you're that type of champion caliber team, you make the investment of getting rid of high draft picks to try and booster what you got. So that's really irrelevant to me.
And by the way, I love those types of deals to an extent where we can sit there and say that Savard was a member of the Detroit Red Wings for all of 5 minutes, because that's how it works. There was a trade made to then make the trade and then still navigate the pieces through 3 different teams. But like, in a weird way, they have to say it that way, where it was he went to Detroit, so salary would be retained on that end before going to Tampa. Those deals are hysterical, because do you remember a few years back when Mark Streit got traded? And
yeah.
For a very few moments, like the trade was to Tampa, and then he was a Pittsburgh Penguin like 20 minutes later. Like, those are just hysterical.
Oh, it's it's the technicalities to get yourself going. But to stay in Florida, the Sam Bennett. I think that Sam Bennett needed a change. You drafted him. It's sort of like the Curtis Lazar thing. The difference is playoff Sam Bennett is a real thing, and you saw that happen before. I think Sam Bennett is is still a phenomenal player. He's got something left in the tank. He can definitely prove his worth, and I think Florida would be a really good spot for him. So you get him. I believe he went for 2 second-round picks in like one draft, and then in the following draft, there's another second-round pick involved. I really like this from Florida's perspective. I think Sam Bennett's a hell of a player. I just think he really needed to change his scenery from what was happening in Calgary, and he might have been underwhelming throughout regular season stretches, but if playoff Sam Bennett's a thing, that's the most important part, and I'm not going to make it seem like it was 7 playoff series in a row and give him a Justin Williams type of Mr. Game 7 type of, flash to him by any means, but there's more left in the tank than the underwhelming play that you got in Calgary, and I think Florida would be an awesome spot for him to kind of rejuvenate that.
I saw a great comparison yesterday because another name that was on the market that we've already briefly mentioned, someone said Scott Lawton hasn't realized his potential yet. That it's the same kind of player, but he's not even to that level yet.
I think he's got more. I think Sam Bennett's got more skill than Lawton does.
No, I kind of agree with that, but what I'm saying is that like he just hasn't had that year yet where you sit there and you go, oh, now I see what made him such a highly touted prospect and guy coming through the system, right? Like he still hasn't had that year yet. I think you're right. Change of scenery does help in this case. And this goes back to what I was starting to say about Florida before we got back onto Tampa when I went off course. Where the thing I do like about their team, truthfully, is also that they seem like they are getting these lower end guys that we don't think of as big names to buy in. That's something pretty significant, that they're getting a lot of guys. I think there's a fun atmosphere going on down there right now. And that all of a sudden they're not just the other Florida team anymore. They are, they're in this thing too. That's why I said I really like where they are in the standings. I like that they made an addition, and I like that they're trying to continue to see where this goes, because I do think they're kind of a dark horse in the play to an extent. I don't know if they're going to challenge Tampa per se, but that remains to be seen. I'd love to see a playoff series where we actually get to find out whether or not they do challenge Tampa.
They could challenge them with Ekblad, I think. If they had Ekblad, it would be a lot more interesting. Not to say that it would have been automatic by any means, of course, because Tampa, I don't want to make it seem like I'm doing them a disservice, but it just would have been it would have been interesting to see them healthy go up against Tampa. It would have been more of a fight, 6, 7 games. Who knows? Like, I do think it could have at least if Columbus could sweep them a couple years ago, to think the talent on the other side with Florida couldn't at least give them a run for their money would not be fair either.
Yeah, no, all good points for sure. And
no, thank you.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I stopped you there.
Well, no, I don't have much more to say about Florida per se. I mean, like I said, I like their team. I think that they're on the rise. I kind of now, I don't know if there's much more I can see from them in the regular season. It's obvious that they are going to kind of just be, they're in a 1-2-3 battle right now. I mean, they're in a, who's going to come out on top in that division, and believe me, there's people, it could be Tampa, it could be Carolina, it could be Florida. It's really interesting to watch.
Yeah, for sure. So
especially as 3 lower market teams too, by the way.
That's a great point. Yeah, definitely. And that's what makes it good. Is like for us hockey fans, for the NHL, I'm sure Gary Bettman's like, please no Florida, please no Florida, please no Florida. But this is what we'll do. This is what we'll do. We hit on the big ones for sure. There are still some other topics to hit on. Jeff Carter got moved to the Penguins, and we got Scott Lawton signing a deal. We got Washington moving on, making some moves, acquiring Raffle and some other pieces. Steve Yzerman,
the Mantha deal was huge.
Is he the greatest of all time of fleecing people? One of my buddies is a Red Wings fan, and he's sending me all these gifs of Steve Yzerman. How does he keep doing it? This guy's unbelievable. I'm like, dude, you're such an idiot. But look, there's still more to talk about, and what we'll do is this is part 1. We'll have part 2 up in a couple days. How does that sound, Durso?
That sounds great. I mean, there's a lot to talk about in the last couple of days. More than just the 24 hours of the deadline day type stuff. Sunday night was as busy as the deadline day was.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next time.